Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today we're focusing on what's hot in HMOs rather, in 2022. And it's rather strange because look, we're here in person, which is remarkably bizarre. So I'd like to welcome my guest speaker here, which is of course Matt Baker. Matt is of course an investor, a developer himself. He has his own training company and his mentorship as well as part of that. So welcome, Matt.
Hi Paul, great to be here in the room. I was in the area, so I thought I'd pop in and do this one in person.
Absolutely, it's remarkably bizarre, isn't it? So I suppose just to kind of, set the scene for today, for people that don't know you, Matt. What I suppose with investments, developments, things like that going on in your own life.
Yeah.
What kind of made you decide to set up a trading company and to mentor people?
Well, I started investing through having a mentor and a coach, and I did some training with a company, and that really got me going. It really kind of lit the fire, and things started to get things worked quite well doing it that way. And also my background was in music, and I was a music teacher as well, teaching piano, and so I've always liked to share. So when I started to be successful, getting deals over the line, and started to kind of hone what I was doing, it was one of the things that kind of made sense that I could start to give back, start to share the knowledge, and kind of set up the HMO platform, which is our way of doing that. But also because a lot of the marketplace is full of a lot of average properties, and I'll come on to this a bit later on.
Sure.
I think it's only right that we as developers kind of show other people how HMO should be done. And I think there's a lot of people still doing HMOs in a way which is going to cause problems for themselves in the future, but also not giving the market and essentially tenants what is a good product.
Totally. Amazing. Well then, let's jump into, I'm just going to check there's no, our camera is wobbling, Matt. We need to be less excited, I think.
Less excited, I think, and don't hit the table.
That's a good point, yes. So we're going to try and be as kind of careful as we can. And kind of with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to ask Matt to jump into his slides. Now this is all kind of strange because usually this would be an effortless job for us. We just need to jump onto the right page here, Matt. So perhaps you could kind of help me with this for a moment.
Is it that one?
Is it over there? It
Yes.
looks like it is. There we go.
Brilliant.
Fabulous. So we're just going to go and share the screen again. And we need to just drop that up to there, don't we? Apologies. 2 seconds, everybody. This is us trying to make stuff exciting and different. And we're just throwing ourselves one or two little challenges as we go through that journey. So there we go, Matt.
Brilliant. I'm going to hit the present button now.
Fabulous. And we're going to wobble as little as possible as we go through that journey, hopefully.
There we go. So hopefully everyone can see that at home. So yeah, today we're talking about what's hot with HMOs in 2022. So just firstly to go into a bit more about the types of things that we've done as an investor. Started off buying buy-to-lets, then get into small HMOs, and then we started to go into larger HMOs and commercial conversions. And we've also done land flips, buying land, getting planning, and start selling it on. So there's a whole variety of things that we've done over the last 7 years whilst we've been investing in developing property. And these are just a few of the things that we have done. But also, Paul, when you asked about giving back, one thing that the pandemic allowed me to do was to kind of hone our technique, and I'll share with you what that technique is a bit later on, our methodologies. But I put it in a book called Next Level Landlord, which very very grateful to be a #1 best seller. So do reach out if you'd like a copy of that. I'm more than happy to post you one out as our compliments. So so that's essentially a little bit about me. But Paul and I wanted to share with you what is good about HMOs this year, what's new, what's the market going to look like in 2022. So what is an HMO in 2022? And to be honest, the answer to this is the same as I would have said in 2021, because it's about understanding how the market is moving and how the market is evolving. So there's an old way of doing HMOs and a new way of doing HMOs. So if we just took these pictures here, now these I took off SpareRoom. Now spareroom.co.uk is the main portal where tenants go and look for rooms and where landlords will be advertising. And essentially I took these off the front page of SpareRoom a few months ago, so they are quite relatively recent. And you can see that there's not that much thought gone into these pictures. In fact, the bedrooms are pretty, it might be an okay size, but there's a TV bracket on the wall, no TV, you've got no bedding on the bed, the curtains, like they probably need a good old hoover or just throwing in the skip. And that laminate flooring, which is just really cheap and it warps really easily. So, and just a very, very brown kitchen. So you wouldn't really want to live in a house like this. And so why would you expect other people, other tenants to do that? And the market has really evolved. And I'm going to give you a bit of a history through my own portfolio. And the one on the left here, now this is the very first HMO that we did. That room is essentially a single room, but it looks all right. We got the grey feature wall. About 6 years ago, all the rage, do a furniture pack, your grey feature wall, and you were all singing, all dancing, and that was a really great HMO. And we let that really easily, and it was one of the best in the area at the time. And then the market's evolving, and we go to the one on the right. And this one we can see, well, there's a few more people doing nicer HMOs in the area now, and so we had to up our game a little bit, and we made it nicer. The grey is a little bit less harsh. I'm still doing the design myself at this point. I'm not the best designer in the world, but I know looks okay. Still got a furniture pack, but it's a bit of a nicer furniture pack. We've got a nice large room. So, and that was about 5 years ago. Then we moved forward about 3 years ago, the one on the left. And in fact, this is the same house as each other. So the one on the left is a room, is a communal space for 4 people. So it's a decent sized kitchen, a place where you can sit down, and then where the photographer's standing is where you can, there's a dining table as well. So it's got everything that they need in that space, and also a bit more thought done to marketing, nicer photos. They're going to attract better quality tenants. And then we move forward to what the types of things we've done in the last couple of years, where we've got really design-led properties, which are just amazing. I'm going to show you an example of someone we worked with at this property a bit later on, and you'll see what I think is probably the pinnacle of HMO design at the moment. Because it's a bit like this. If we go back to 1998, there's a great analogy here. All computers were made equal. The personal computer, you had companies like Hewlett Packard, Dell, IBM. Yeah, they're all vying for your business with these computers, which are pretty grey. I call it a bit of a beige box. It pretty much is a beige box. And you've got, they're all the same. And because they're all the same, the only way the price is going to go is down. And they're quite complicated. You have to code, you use things like MS-DOS to code it. I'm sure you can't remember that.
Sadly, I can actually. Sadly, I can. Yeah.
But so back in 1998, that was the problem. It was a highly commoditized marketplace. And then in 1998, Steve Jobs comes out with something a bit different, something beautiful. It's the Imac G3. It's all in one box. It's colourful. It's see-through. It's quite sexy, to be fair. And you turn it on, it just works. You don't need to code or do anything like that. It's literally just plug and play, designed to be very user-friendly. And what happened is that they created their own market. It's no longer called a computer, it's called a Mac. And essentially the profit margins shot up to well over 20% back then. And they're pretty much $1 trillion company, or very close to that these days. And they managed to maintain that market leading, they've created their own market, not even market leading, they're leading in their own marketplace. So it's easier for them. When you're going out shopping for a computer, you go, well, should I buy a Mac or a PC? And they're exactly the same thing, but one's about 5 times the price of the other. And people still go for the Mac. I do, as a musician, it's a great thing to have. And this is what we need to be with our HMOs. We need to be creating our own marketplace within the market, so like a miniature markets, and we stand out from the crowd. And this is a nice graphical way of looking at it. In the middle, when you're creating the beige box, and the modern day equivalent of a beige box is probably a grey feature wall, and that will change over time as to what is deemed to be part of that commoditized marketplace, where you just don't stand out from the crowd. You're going to be always, your price is going to be pushed down. And when you create a next level HMO, which is what we call those HMOs, which are at the top of the marketplace, in that top 5%, those best customers will pay for quality design, quality space, and quality service. And this is what we mean by HMOs in 2022 and beyond. This is what the market needs. And to be fair, you might look on Facebook, on Instagram, and see some amazing looking HMOs and think that everybody's doing it that way, but they're not. It's still the minority of the marketplace. So don't be fooled by thinking the market's oversaturated, there's no opportunity, and you're going to be in competition with loads of other people. That's not necessarily the case. Depends where you're investing, but there's a huge amount of opportunity out there. And I mentioned earlier about our methodologies and how we piece it together, and this is what the Next Level Landlord, my book, talks about, which is the tenant first method, which is how a next level landlord thinks. It's all the things that they know about. And so those 5 principles that you can see there at the top of your screen essentially are the key things to get right. Having focus on your business, your brand, having that design blueprint that means that your product is yours, and that's why a tenant's attracted to it, because it's your business. Have insight into the people they're letting to, the place, the planning, the permissions that you can get, which means you can get a massive uplift in value, planning gain, etc. And then you've got you can find properties with ease, regardless of what market they're in. A next level landlord can also review and deliver projects. They've also got a service-led approach to lettings, because we're talking about being top 5% in service, not just in creating the product, it's how that product is managed and looked after. And then have a business that can thrive. So, and the tenant first methodology is all about that. So if you want to read more about it, then do grab a copy of the book.
And this is kind of, Matt, just to kind of recount what I've heard, this is really just about putting the customer first, isn't it? It's kind of, and that I suppose is a business principle that the best companies apply, isn't it?
Of course.
Frankly, is think about your customer, walk a mile in your customer's shoes, and understand exactly what it is that customer thinks, wants, and in effect design everything else around that.
Yeah, exactly. It makes complete business sense, because any company, you're going to set up a business, you're going to identify a problem, and then you're going to solve that problem. And if you solve that problem in a remarkable way, then you get good customers and you get good business, and you make good profits, and the customer's happy. So it's a win-win. So why isn't the HMO market seen in the same way? You create a product which is market leading, which tenants fall over themselves to want to live in, because it's a much better living experience. It just makes sense. And there's stats after stats and evidence that we can show that proves that it's actually more beneficial to spend a little bit more on these properties, because your uplift is better, your rents are better in the long run, and you have fewer issues. So your profitability is just better.
And it's quite a departure from a sort of a traditional landlord and tenant relationship, where traditionally the landlord let the tenant into the unit. Let's not call it a nice room. It kind of let the tenant in order for them to pay the rent. And if they don't pay the rent, we get very aggressive with them and send the bailiff in to go and take stuff off them until they pay the rent. And it's a very different setup, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of housing as a service in a way. It's ensuring that it's a more of an even relationship. It's no longer the landlord and the tenant. That's very outdated, kind of overlord, and it's kind of that feudal system, which is essentially where it comes from. It's more of a collaborative relationship where you provide a service. If the service is rubbish, they're probably going to move out and go and live in someone else's house. Especially with HMOs, it's a lot more fleeting than moving into a single buy to let, where they might be there for 2, 3, 4, 5 years because they like it. You're going to be less interaction with a half family, whereas there's going to be more interaction with a house full of 6 people, 7 people moving in and out more often. And that's another thing that we find is actually when you do this type of approach, people stay longer. And I've got some stats I'll share with you in a moment about that.
Fabulous, interesting. Let's crack on, yeah.
Cool. In fact, here we are. Here are some stats. So, what does the outlook look like for HMOs in 2022? Well, from a rental perspective, demand has rocketed. And this is from Spare Room's most recent report about what's out there right now. And there's never been such a high demand for rooms post the pandemic. It really has skyrocketed the demand for people wanting to go into shared housing. So that is a really positive thing for us, that the market is growing. But also, when we do the next level HMO strategy, the top end stuff, top 5%, a lot of that falls under the bracket of co-living, and I'm not really going to go into that in too much detail today. But if we just call it co-living for now, the average age of co-living tenants has risen to over 28 years. And that's an increase of 5 years over the last 4 years, which means that people are staying in properties till later in life. That means they're generally older, generally got probably more disposable income, can afford a better rent. So that's a real positive for us. But also the duration of a co-living tenancy is over 18 months as well, and that's a 50% increase over the last 3 years as well. So that means that you're having less turnover, and the most expensive part of doing an HMO or any property is when tenants leave, because you have a void period, you have to do a bit of work to the property, and you have to pay to remarket the room. So it does mean that now is a really good time to be in HMOs. 2022 is pretty strong for that. And then when we look at the outlook for growth, people say, the market's inflated, and some people saying to me, the market's inflated, we're going to wait until the market corrects itself and it's going to come down. And you go and look at the stats, you go, well, you'll be waiting for a very long time, because the stats actually show that the market correcting itself is going up. Because if you look at this, which is the most recent stats from Nationwide Building Society about average house prices, you can see the blue line, which is the house prices themselves, and that red line, which is the trend. And anyone who's statistically minded will know that the price will always come back to meet the average. So that moving average will continue to change, but the line will continue to go up until it meets that red line. It might wobble on the way, but it's always going to be going towards that red line, whether it's below or above. So there's more pressure statistically for house prices to go up. So definitely do not wait to buy. Now is a really good time to buy, because personally, I believe there's probably a good 3 to 4 years of great growth in the marketplace at the moment. So I think it is a strong time to buy in capital terms as well. So let's start to look at how to find HMOs. I'm going to be looking at this through planning strategy, because there's an easy way and there is a hard way. So the easy way is where you could go get a house, and it would be a small HMO. So this is what we call a C4 property. So in residential use classes, your normal house is a C3 property, and then when you make it a small HMO, so that's when you have between 3 and 6 unconnected people, so they're not related, sharing a property, that would be classed as C4. Now that change from C3 to C4 is generally permitted development, which means you can just go and do it without asking anyone's permission. So that's a really positive thing, really great thing that we can do, unless there's an Article 4 directive, which a local council can bring in if they've got a problem with HMOs, and which stops that change of use from C3 to C4 without a full planning application. So the easy way to find HMOs is to just go to an area where there's no Article 4 directive. You can just take a 3-bedroom house, turn it into a 5-bed or 6-bedroom HMO, and the only thing you need is licensing. That's the first thing to do as an easy way to get into it, and that's what I probably suggest most beginner HMO landlords should do. You kind of cut your teeth on the easy stuff first.
And licensing is just a tick box exercise, is it? Presume.
Yes, so licensing it is important to understand that your requirements for licensing. But each council will have their own kind of list of stuff that they look for. We're talking about getting the room sizes correct, talking about the right amenity standards, and make sure you're a fit and proper person yourself. You haven't gone to prison, etc. So it just makes sure that you are eligible to take that license. So go and speak to your local council about the licensing requirements that you would need. But there'll be no planning restriction from stopping you from doing it.
Cool.
So this is essentially what I was saying before. The C3 to C4 is Class L of Part 3 of Schedule 2 of the GPDO. So those who like detail can take a picture of that slide and go read it for yourself. And that change of use from house to HMO is permitted development. So what you then might do is, if you want to make your HMO larger, maybe have 7, 8 or 9 or even more people living in that property, because it's a big one. You could then apply for something called sui generis planning. Sui generis is a Latin term which means in a class of its own. So it's outside the normal classes. So that's where the sui generis HMOs land essentially in planning terms. But if you were to apply for a 7-person HMO, you could then go to C4 through the permitted development rights, and then you've got 6 people living in that house. You then apply to have 1 extra person living in that house. All the council are doing is assessing what is the impact of that extra person. So it's not that difficult to do, especially if there's no Article 4 directive there. And what that will do is potentially give you a nice little uplift in value because you've managed to get some planning permission on that property.
And the reason for that, Matt, is just to make it a smaller impact on the planning application. So if I go from C3 into sui generis, we're going from 2 people living together in a house to 7 people, where it says an impact of 5 people rather than up to 6, I think just the 1.
Yes, exactly. So if they're looking at things like parking requirements, how many people live, the amount of rubbish, etc., that people are going to be creating. If the property is already got 6 people in it, then adding 1 person isn't a significant change of use, essentially. So it's a relatively straightforward thing for them to say yes to. But as I'm going to show you in a minute, the council can always have the test that you need to pass as well. So there might be some other things to be aware of. For example, like an HMO density test, which I'll come on to in a moment, to make sure there aren't too many HMOs in one area. So that's essentially where we come on to the hard way. Now, if we have an Article 4, that means that the Class L permitted development right has been removed. So we now need to apply for planning permission to get your HMO into C4 or sui generis. Sui generis you need it anyway, but to get into C4 you need planning as well. So at this point you're going to be tested against the planning policy. Now, planning policy is just a set of tests that you need to pass, essentially. And if you pass all the tests, then the council's got no reason to refuse you. And for example, I know I've seen some people be pulled into appeal. I can see a comment here about the 7th room maybe dealt with under delegated powers without a full review by planning committee. Yes, because it's a relatively straightforward thing to do, but sometimes planning committees do pull you into committee. Maybe you've had a couple of complaints from neighbours. If you passed all the tests, the committee might refuse you for a stupid reason, then you just appeal it and you get it anyway. So you just need to understand the rules, and then generally we've always got what we want in the end, even if we've had to maybe go the back roads to get there. So essentially that's what we're doing. We're applying for planning for something simple as possible, to make that change of use as simple as possible. And just to help with your assessment of areas, we have put together a nice little map between ourselves and Nimbus, which is called our Article 4 map. If you go to bit.ly/Article 4 map, 4 spelled FOUR, then you can download that. And what that does, it will just show you every council that does have an Article 4 direction for HMOs.
And there was a question in the chat from Kunwar about that. So I suggest, Kunwar, if you download that,
there you go.
That map there, that will give you the answer to some of this. There are some tricks I'll show you in a moment about how to find out whether there's an Article 4 or not. But that's kind of your easy way to say, well, which towns aren't in Article 4 is to choose that.
Quick reference, yeah.
Fabulous.
Cool. So with the hard way, and we want to do the hard way. So just before we go on, Barry, that map is just a standalone PDF which you can download from the HMO platform. So that'll be
And I'll jump into Nimbus in a moment and show you some more stuff around that in a moment. So
correct. Yeah.
We're going to make you wait, Barry. I'm going to make you wait, Kunwar, in a second. So build the suspense.
Indeed. So where was I? So the hard way, yes, doesn't stop you from getting planning. It just means you need to learn the rules for the area that you're investing in, you're buying properties, or work with consultants that know those rules. And I know Paul's going to talk about that as well. So you comply with it and you beat the policy. And here's an example of one policy that you might need to pass. Each council will have their policy. In Portsmouth, for example, they have their supplementary planning document, their SPD, which talks specifically about how they want HMOs to be in Portsmouth. It doesn't mean that they don't want them, because they know that they need them. And actually the government planning documents, and I'm not a planning expert, but whatever the big overarching planning documents actually infer that they want more HMOs. They're not stopping HMOs from being developed. They just want them to control where they go, which is why an HMO with planning permission is more valuable, and an HMO in an Article 4 area is more valuable if it's got planning permission, because it's harder to get them through. So in this particular instance, they want to support the mixed and balanced communities of Portsmouth, and the way they do that is through this density test, and they want to identify how many HMOs there are within a 50-metre radius of a property that you're thinking of turning into an HMO, and if more than 10% of those properties are already HMOs, or by adding this one, it takes it over 10% of the properties, at that point you won't get planning on it essentially at all, because as a point of policy, you're deferring from that policy. So yeah, it's just you're just counting houses essentially, and this is where Nimbus can come in really handy, and Paul will show you that a bit later on about how Nimbus can help you to identify houses which comply with this policy essentially.
One of the questions I've heard from people historically about this has been, how do you know where the HMOs are? Because I guess you could have a planning consent for a C4 or sui generis HMO, or you could have it on the register. Is there anywhere else you can find these HMOs if there's a...
Well, the main place is that if you think about how the council is going to identify an HMO, it is going to be the licence information, so the HMO register, or planning permissions. They take them into account even if the planning permission hasn't been implemented, as well. So they just assume that you're going to implement it if you've got it. And then other things they look at is council tax information, because a lot of HMOs are occupied by students. So if there's no council tax being paid on the property, they would assume that that is an HMO as well, but you won't have that information. So the two key places are planning and licensing, I'd say. Yeah. So how do we get on to sourcing them? Well, we firstly look at properties that have got potential. So these are houses that can become HMOs, or other properties that can be extended, etc., to get more floor space. We can also look at existing HMOs where we take maybe a poor performing portfolio, we turn it around, we do some works to it, and then we make them next level HMOs. And then there's also commercial conversions. I'm just going to cover each of these with an example. So here we have Scott. Now Scott is a lovely guy. He's a guy that we've been working with for about 2.5 years now, and he is a plasterer, so he knows the trades, but he didn't really know how to do some HMOs. So we were chatting to him about HMOs, and we actually saved him on a project he is about to do, and he basically decided not to do it after chatting to us, and instead he came and worked with us as a client, and then he went and found this particular property in Portsmouth. So as you can see, tie it nicely together. So it is in Portsmouth, and what we wanted to do was to take it, get planning on it, and then turn it into a large 7-bedroom HMO. And essentially this is what he did. He created a beautiful 7-bedroom HMO in Portsmouth. It essentially passes the tests because there's not that many HMOs nearby. He's got a property in an area where kind of an end of a street, so so there's not that many properties to test, and the ones nearby weren't HMOs. So in a really good position to pass that test, and also created lots of space internally. So Portsmouth have quite strict communal space standards and bedroom standards and bathroom standards, so he had to comply with all of those, and we worked with him through our own in-house deal clinics that we do, and he created this, which I think is a stunning design, and it's quite I think at the pinnacle of what HMOs can be if approached correctly. Our creative director actually helped him to piece together this design, doing a mood board and helping select furniture, etc., having the ethos of wellness within houses. So I think there's quite a lot of people that are doing on vogue, on trend design, and at the moment it's quite dark. You see a lot of dark greens, dark blues, and dark colours are very oppressive. They look great, quite impressive in like a hotel scenario, where you're staying a few nights, but you want people to stay in your houses for 12, 18 months, 24 months. It needs to feel, I think, light, airy, and the subtle things that call back to nature always promote better mental health and well-being, which is why we incorporate these things in our design. As you can see, there's a bedroom. It pretty much looks like a hotel room, but this is an HMO room, so commanding £700 per month in Portsmouth, where the average rent's about £550. So we're smashing rental ceilings with these as well, which is amazing. So this is what is possible as a next level HMO.
And sort of obviously state the obvious, but you know, if that was your house and you were going to sell it, you wanted to look like that when you sold it to get the absolute maximum capital value out of it. And and it's kind of so obvious and yet so not obvious when you think about letting an HMO to say, well, you present your HMO and you let it in the same way as you'd want to sell the building if you were going to go and sell it. And in essence, that's what's being put forward, isn't it? It's just a really sharp finish to a nice house. And actually, you know, if that was a house was on the market to sell, you think that's the pretty good comp, or is it good kitchen, good bathrooms? You know, it's kind of same old stuff you talk a lot about sort of in terms of getting your comps right and this sort of stuff, isn't it? So it's very interesting. It's just bringing to life that sort of that finish, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, and when you do it and you do it well, you get a lot of you have like 3 or 4 people applying for the room. You can choose the best tenant. You sometimes get tenants outbidding each other, saying, well, actually I'll pay £10 more a month, and because I want to move into that room. And it means that you're not in that commoditized part of the marketplace where the tenant is literally choosing between 10 potential rooms, and they're all pretty much the same, all quite average. They go, I want to live in this house because it looks like this, and because it's top 5% essentially, so it rents quite easily.
Selling a quality of life, aren't you, basically, on an HMO letter?
Yeah, no, of course. So you'll probably like this. So that house was bought for 250, refurb about 235, cash flow 1700, end value close to 600,000. So £90,000 profit of equity, and then 34% return on cash. That's a 7-bedroom all-en-suite co-living next level HMO. So that is an example of taking something, a house which has potential, and the main potential that house had was the roof, because and the rear. We're able to do an extension out the rear to create a really nice large communal space, and then we're able to go into the loft to create an extra 2 bedrooms. So we generally would only go into a loft if we can get 2, because then we can get 2 in the loft, 3 on the first floor and 2 on the ground floor, making 7, which is a nice formula, pattern that we use regularly with ourselves and our clients. So, secondly, some creative deals using existing HMOs. So this is another guy, Mihal, who we've been working with since March last year. Is currently in one of our 12-month programs. He basically he just goes out there and just storms it. He's since we're working with him, he's raised £2 million in joint venture finance, and essentially done 12 deals, 12 HMOs in less than 12 months. And one of the creative things that he's done is he formed a really great relationship with an estate agent in Essex, and was able to get in touch with a landlord that was selling. So he's direct to landlord with a bit of a finder's fee to the agent, with a portfolio of 7 properties, 7 HMOs that are existing, which is cash flowing, so positive cash flow about £10,000 a month, which is fantastic. But the property portfolio was like half falling down. I think only one of the 7 had a license, but they were all licensable, and the owners just didn't know what they were doing, didn't have a clue, didn't have a Scooby when it comes to running, managing HMOs and doing it correctly. And they were like, oh, everything's fine, the fire's all good, and like half of them have fire alarms in, and it's so Mahal's job is to get them all compliant, work with the existing owners to get them compliant and get them licensed, and then he's basically buying them and doing that process as well. So he was able to creatively buy 7 HMOs in one go, and he's buying them over straight away. Then over 2 years, he's going to be putting the plan together to refurbish them. And one of them's got a plot of land at the side, and he was able to use Nimbus to kind of appraise them as well, because if you're doing 7 or buying a portfolio, it takes quite a bit of time to go through each one and find out what's going on with that. So Nimbus is very valuable, because one thing we do in our 12-month programs, we include Nimbus as part of the package, because it's such an invaluable tool for just this type of example. Then we get on to commercial stuff, which is quite cool. You like the commercial stuff, don't you? So what we're going to do, commercial to resi. I love this stuff because you can be really creative with old buildings which have outlived their original use essentially, and the government has kind of unified all permitted development rights into essentially now two when it comes to commercial conversions. So the first one is Class MA. Now, this is where we can take a Class E building. Now, Class E is a general business use, and it covers all of the old Class B1, A1, all of those old use classes have been amalgamated into what is called a Class E. So I'm not going to go through that kind of history, but for now, most buildings on the high street now are Class E, which is great, because permitted development allows us to convert those into residential. But there's some strings attached. We have to submit a prior notification first and foremost, and within that prior notification, we need to show that we are complying with the minimum residential space standards. So that means that we can't create a dwelling smaller than 37 square meters. You might be thinking, well, why would we want to do it smaller than that anyway? But there were developers that were creating flats that were like 10 square meters and like studios and stuff. And I just think, I don't understand what's going through people's minds when they're doing that, because they're unmortgageable, they're undesirable to live in, and I think they're just not future-proof as a development option. And the government don't like it, so they've stopped us from being able to do that type of development. Then we can't develop any building which is bigger than 1,500 square meters. So do double check. Sometimes you get excited seeing a really huge property going, yes, it's converted onto flats on the PD, and you find out it's 3,000 square meters and you only do half of it. Doesn't mean you can't get planning on the other half, but it means that you've got half of that under permitted development to kind of give you a bit of a kind of fallback position, knowing that you can get some of it under PD.
It is square meters, so
yeah,
1,500 square meters is 16,000 square feet, 16,500 square feet, which in 37 square meters minimum space standards, you get a lot of flats into that, don't you? So
yeah,
they're quite big buildings at that sort of level, aren't they? 15 square meters.
They are, yes. We've been caught out by it once, where we looked at an old Debenhams building and we was like, oh, let's convert the whole thing, and then kind of about a day or two later, we looked at it and go, okay, it's actually quite big. And it was a good number of flats, but you can do the maths. It must have been vacant for 3 consecutive months prior to the submission of the change of use. So if it's an empty block, obviously that's easy. If it's tenanted, it means that you've got to get the tenants out and then wait 3 months before you apply, essentially. It also must have been in the use for the last 2 years prior. Now, this is a big thing because it's opened up a lot of properties that weren't eligible for permitted development before this permitted development right came in. So that's really cool. And it also means it's a moving feast. So if you buy a property and it's not an office and you want it to be an office for 2 years, and then you can convert it under PD. So it gives you that chance to have a longer play with certain types of properties if you wanted to. They don't allow you to convert nurseries or healthcare centres if they're deemed to be a loss to the local community. So do be aware of that. Development is not a given if you're converting nurseries or healthcare centres, which would still fall under Class E. But the key,
one of the things I noticed about is of course pre-Class E, nursery and healthcare centres were a kind of a D1 use, whatever it was,
somewhere else.
Which means that if you were then going to replace those, finding another D1 use in that area is quite difficult. Whereas of course now they're part of Class E, you can just relocate that somewhere else. So I kind of, whilst sort of wonder if there's a sort of a relocation thing around all of that that is kind of makes that easier to get through than, whilst the headlines you can't do it, whether there's a kind of relocation thing. I kind of wanted this simpler route through that.
Yes, I think if there's 2 nurseries on the same street, for example, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But the council just will assess whether that loss is a problem for the area. But I think the great thing about Class E is it does give business owners flexibility in what they can do. I think that is really great as business owners ourselves, and that's fantastic, and giving people that opportunity, not just for us to convert them to housing. But the key thing that we need to know about today, because of its HMOs we're talking about, is the removal of the Class L permitted development right, which means that if you create flats under Class MA, you then cannot then turn them into HMOs without planning permission. So you might create 10 3-bed flats, but you won't be able to rent them as to 3 mates, for example, because that would be deemed an HMO. You can only rent them to families. So if you want them to become HMOs, you then need to apply for planning permission to do that, which wouldn't be necessarily denied or refused. because you would just then go back to the policy and say, do I comply with policy? So you could probably, I'd say, argue that probably at least half of them would go through, but depending on whether you've got a whole row of HMOs next to you or not. And then the other one, the new Class G. Now, the old Class G was awesome because you didn't need to tell anyone that you were doing it. You could just go and do it. But the new Class G has opened up a bit more. There's some more rules you need to follow. So you do need to submit a prior notification, which is like that simple planning application. That still get a planning consultant or an architect to do for you. They are still a bit complex, but not as complex as full planning. So what you can do is you can put 2 flats above any Class E use property. You will need to comply with minimum residential space standards. You must have enough natural light. This is the same for Class MA actually as well. You must have natural light in the building. So that is a way that councils can start to refuse them if there's definitely not enough natural light coming through. And that's a bit subjective. And I don't like subjectivity in planning permission because it increases the level of risk. So if in doubt, that window might not be able to be for a bedroom or for a living space, which is where you would need to have natural light. It could be a kitchen and doesn't need to have natural light. It could be a bathroom, doesn't need to have natural light. But the great thing about Class G is that the Class L permitted development right still works. So for example, you could, in a non-Article 4 area, take a shop like the one on the left here. Is this one of yours?
It's not. No,
it's not. It's just a random picture I found. Okay.
Yeah, not ours. Yeah.
So that particular, we take any of those on the high street, and you can convert the upstairs into 2 6-bedroom flats. Effectively, because you've got to do minimum space standards, you might say, well, I'm going to convert them into 2 4-bedroom flats, get them signed off as 4-bedroom flats. Once I've done that, then I can just turn the living spaces into bedrooms, and you've got 2 6-beds. As long as you've got enough living communal space for licensing and for your desirability and lettability, then you can do that, because once there's nothing to stop you from changing 4-bed to 6-bed flat. So you can have a 12-bedroom HMO above a shop using permitted development rights if you use the new Class G, which I think is friggin' awesome.
One of the things kind of goes to my head about the new Class G is, so in the old Class G, what kind of was often interesting is that if you had a street scene like that, and actually Cotton Republic was a sort of double unit or something like that, then you could split it. You could split the ground floor retail unit, and then you have 2 retail units with 2 flats above each of them, and you get 4 flats above there. And obviously those then Class L to HMO, you get 24 letting rooms upstairs. I don't know if the same thing's true with the new Class G. I'm perhaps interested to get some planning advice on that. So if you take an office building, can you split it into 2 offices? Yeah. And then apply and get
I think
2 of each?
I think logically, yes. I think it works. We just got to follow the right process and get the right stamps of approval at the right time. So if you're going to split the shop into 2, do that the right way. So if it requires any planning change to change the outside, then yes. I don't think you need planning to split a shop in 2. I think that's the same as it.
We would actually, but
yeah. So that, again, speak to a planning consultant, but assuming that you go the right way to get 2 shops. Once you've got 2 shops, they need to be occupied as 2 shops, I would suggest, and then I don't see why that wouldn't give you 2 lots of Class G, so potentially up to 4 flats. But again, do double check that with a planning consultant. It's not something we have done, but it's something that we look at doing if the right deal comes around. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. I believe.
The thing I can never talk when we talk about Class G. The thing I can never kind of not mention is, of course, sort of the key difference between Class G and Class MA is the vacancy test. Obviously, in HMOs, whether you can have an HMO afterwards, whether you're going for full planning or not, but the vacancy test is something that I always think is really interesting, because those difficult buildings to try and get Class MA on, we need to prove to be empty for 3 months. Whereas, of course, Class G you don't. So if you need to get the tenant out, you can apply for Class G to get the upper parts back, which then means the tenant needs to move out as part of that, and then that gives you your 3 months, and then they're going to apply your Class MA afterwards. So I always think that kind of that missing piece on Class G with the vacancy test opens up the opportunity to, if you need to be kind of hostile and try and get the building back, then Class G followed by Class MA is kind of an interesting shout for that, I think.
Yeah. Cool. I think now, there's a final thing, is just to identify some opportunities where HMOs are now easier to do than they were before. So and the main thing is the fact that there's opportunities above a lot more properties for that Class G, because the Class E has opened up a lot of other services. So you can now do 2 flats above shops, which you could always anyway, but you can do them above financial and professional services, above cafes, above restaurants, above offices, above gyms, above health clinics. So it takes a little bit of a while to get your head around the fact that, yes, I can put 2 flats above an office. Okay, yeah, but you can. So you just, again, speak to a planning consultant about it, but also these are still relatively new, and if you find a bit of an awkward situation, it's possible that there hasn't been an application put through in that way before. So you might find yourself a bit of a testing ground to see how a council will react. So yeah, just be aware of what risk you're taking, especially financially, if you're taking on any leverage, etc. So essentially, that's what we'll be looking at for where our HMOs use in 2022. Using those Class G allowances, but also, as I said, using Class MA. It's opened up buildings which are not as old as previous ones, and the ones that necessarily haven't been in that use class for as long as before. So how does then Nimbus help with all of this?
Well, this is perhaps where I take over, and I'm sort of nervous about the wobbly effect on the camera as I'm sort of tinkering around with the computer here. But let's just drop back onto. Let's just get rid of this a second. There we go. I think I want to just switch across to here. So this is my version of Nimbus here, and what I'd like to do is do the usual kind of deal in 90 seconds. We need to find some HMO opportunities. But before I do that, what I would like to do is to ask the viewers today to have to pop into the chat a location. Halim's seen what I'm gonna say. I'd like a location popped into the chat if I could, just to see whereabouts you would like me to go and search for some opportunities. And I'll perhaps do a couple of places. So we've got quite a few there. Matt, would you like to take one? Yeah, to pick one for me.
Let's go Nottingham.
Let's go. And you're going to do something difficult. So the reason that Matt's chosen Nottingham, I suspect, is because it's going to be difficult. So the reason Nottingham will be difficult, obviously, Nottingham's got some great universities there. It's got lots of HMOs and this sort of thing, and therefore it's going to be an Article 4 in place. It's going to be a challenging place. And given that I've got 90 seconds to go and find an opportunity, this is going to be. No, it's fine. Let's go for it. And never shirk away from a challenge. So let's just drop into to Nimbus. So for those of you who don't know, haven't seen Nimbus before, this is Nimbus Maps. This is our Elite Plus system, actually, the bit I'm going to be using most today. So what it's done, it's gone off and found the centre of Nottingham for me. It's plotted a radius around that and is showing me freehold titles, edged in red in my case here, and some leases that are granted there and registered with the land registry as well. Now, before I do that, I'm just going to clear that search mode. All this stuff's kind of clickable and it'll kind of become relevant in a moment. But what I want to do to start with is I want to firstly take a little look at Nottingham, and just to understand Nottingham as a place before I start sort of looking for opportunities. I guess we've got the sort of the university out to the sort of the west here and down here too. I suppose the first thing that I'm kind of interested in is Nottingham as a place. So the first thing I want to understand is firstly sort of average sales prices across Nottingham. So I want to understand from a residential point of view what the values are, and what this is showing me here is the average sales prices of residential properties across Nottingham in effect. Why am I talking about residential values across Nottingham when we're talking HMOs today? Well, I suppose for me it's kind of interesting to understand where the good parts of Nottingham are and where the weaker parts of Nottingham are. So we get a feel for whether it's a sort of an exciting place for people to live in, whether it's kind of an affluent part of the town or not. And in essence, the sales prices of residential properties divided by the size of them, in effect, that rate per square foot is going to give us that understanding of where across Nottingham is an attractive place to live and where are the kind of the weaker parts of Nottingham. So that's the first thing I wanted to understand. The second thing that I wanted to understand then was actually where the HMOs are. So this is the reason why when Matt sort of dug through the list and chose Nottingham, this is kind of why it was kind of an interesting place for him to choose, because obviously what we have here is a huge number of HMOs across Nottingham. As you kind of zoom in, there seem to be more and more of these things. Now, I suppose this kind of brings up a question for me, Matt, in terms of, Article 4, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it kind of a positive thing or a negative thing when you're looking at HMOs?
Well, the answer is always it depends.
Okay.
It depends on the area and the policy. We generally think it's a good thing, because when we can get through an Article 4 direction and get planning on it, then it gives us a big uplift in value, because they are difficult to create, so they're more sought after if you were to sell it. Yeah.
Fabulous. So let's have a little look at this then. So this is showing me where the HMOs are, and I guess so for me, what's interesting about HMOs is about there being this volume of HMOs. Obviously, is that means there's a very strong marketplace there. There's a demand for these HMOs because there's so many of them there. So of course, if we can create a next level HMO and create the best kind of HMOs in those areas, then there's going to be a real marketplace flocking to this particular opportunity that we're creating. So we have a bunch of things that we can do to try and find opportunities. And let's just try and bring those sort of three ways that Matt talked about, to kind of bring those to life for you. We're going to do that. I'm going to use our Elite Plus system here, which is, in effect, enables this little strategy section just here. So this is me going to kind of make my life easy, really. So the first thing sort of Matt talked about was picking HMOs with potential in effect. So it's kind of most simple. What this does is I can click a button here, and what this does is it looks at all the HMOs that are shown across the map in effect. I'm going to zoom in just to bring this to life a little bit for you. And in essence, what it does is it shows me a kind of color coding for those HMOs. Well, firstly, it's saying, well, which of these HMOs are complete buildings, so that we have a complete control of it, so we can do a heavy refurb on it, and we can do some kind of interesting stuff on it. The second thing it's doing is interesting stuff. We can extend, we can put more units in, we can go into the roof, we can go into the basement, and this sort of stuff. The color coding then with this is showing me the warmer the color, the smaller the built space that sits on that title relative to the size of the title. So that again, the smaller the built space relative to the size of the site in effect. So just to kind of try to bring that to life, you can see two different colors here. So here we have sort of a warmer color, and here we have a darker color in effect. And what this is showing to me here is that if we submit a planning application for this particular building to extend it out the back in line with the one next door, we are submitting planning applications then that are in line with the character of that area, and therefore would like to get support for that extension. That extension itself is going to make the building you're looking at look like the one next door, and therefore it should be supported. And therefore, kind of this brings to life some of these things down here. You've got these sort of bigger extensions at the back. Down here we have a very sort of skinny extension here relative to these ones. So could we put something rather more on that site in effect? So it's allowing me very quickly to see which properties have a smaller density on the site, where I can drive the density up and put more building onto that site in effect, which means more rooms, which means more return. Happy days, thanks very much. So that's the first one. The second one that I want to kind of bring to life, I'm going to put my HMOs back on again, is to say the other opportunities that sit here, and where we can probably drive a much higher return, is to take a C3 property and move that into HMO. Now, the challenge with that is because there's so many HMOs around there, there's going to be sort of small pockets in these areas where this is going to work. So we have a second strategy here, which looks at all of the houses in the area. And guess what? In this part of Nottingham, there aren't any C3 houses that are able to convert into HMOs, because there's so many HMOs around that particular location. But of course, if I just nudge ever so slightly west down here, we start to find some opportunities that then would work. And in fact, I might just bring those to life again by just zooming in just a moment. So in essence, what this is showing me is that there's a pocket of houses around here where the particular 50-meter radius around there, in effect, avoids the majority of the HMOs that are around there in effect. So very quickly, I can pick out pockets of a few houses, and in particular, some that are perhaps more interesting than others. So here, maybe I've got a bit of a side extension here that I could perhaps do to bring that further out, subject to overlooking to the houses next door in effect. But in essence, very quickly find those opportunities where I can then go and drive more density into the site, but equally change that use from the C3 use into a C4 or sui generis use. That's a very easy thing to do. So I can click on a title. It's showing me here that actually we're in an Article 4 area, but for Lenton Manor, the density of the site itself is 29% of the site is built over, and we can click about some of the others and see kind of what densities of built space are on those other sites. But actually, the ratio of HMO properties to residential C3 properties for this particular property within 50 meters of that location is just 4%, and therefore well below the 10% that we need to kind of demonstrate to get ourselves through that Article 4 across Nottingham. In order to then go and unlock this opportunity, the next thing we want to go and do is to then go and write to the owner of that property, in effect. So what I can do is I can click on this little title number here. This brings out this information panel. It's showing me I've got a C3 terraced house, in effect, on the title. I can then go and buy a title register through Nimbus, and I can save this property to a thing called workflow, which gives me a whole load of stages to go and save a particular property to. That then allows me to manage, in effect, an outbound letter campaign to a whole load of owners, in effect. And this little system here allows me to manage that sort of outbound letter campaigning process, in effect. So I save sites into each of these various sections using that save to workflow button. I organize myself in a nice, simple way, which is going to be a bunch of sites where I'm going to write my letters out on those. I'm going to have another stage that says I've had a response back, and that's a positive response. I'm going to have some meetings arranged with those people. I'm going to perhaps have another one which is heads of terms agreed or something like that. I'm going to move these sites through this kind of journey using workflow. And of course, for those properties that I send letters to that I don't get a response to, I may want to send a follow-up in maybe a couple of weeks' time, or even perhaps 3 months' time, or something like that. And Nimbus then offers this very useful little tool up here, which is this download button. And what that does is it takes this whole workflow and puts it into an Excel file for you to allow you to do a very quick mail merge to send letters out in bulk. So that's what sort of allows this. What we typically budget here at Nimbus is that if you send 100 letters out, then typically you'll get about a 10% response rate. You'll get kind of 10% of people will reply to you saying, thank you for your letter, and I'm either interested or I'm not interested. And you typically get a 50-50 split of that. So with 100 letters, you typically get 5 people saying, it's interesting you wrote to me now, another 5 saying, actually, it's not interesting you wrote to me now, I don't want to sell this property at all. So of the 5 that come back saying, I am interested, in effect, you need to close the deal, one in 5 of those, and happy days, you bought a site off market through that process, in effect. I suppose the final thing then that is perhaps interesting is then just turning our attention to the appraisal that follows downstream of this. And I suppose what I want to understand is, firstly, what the value of the house is that I'm perhaps trying to buy, and secondly, then what the value of the HMO is that I'm going to create as part of that. So what are those sales prices of HMOs, in effect? There's a couple of ways in which I can do that. So the first one I can do is I can use this residential comparables button here, and I perhaps might just give myself like 18 months something. So what this shows me here is across this part of Nottingham, we can see the red spots are the HMOs that are being plotted on the map, and then these little kind of blue spots are all the sales prices, all the sales that have the properties that have sold, in effect. I might get rid of the HMOs now because it's kind of quite full on, in effect. So this is showing me all the properties that have sold across that area. There's 179 properties across that area that have sold. I can then drop all of those properties into Excel, and that's then going to give me a nice, neat understanding of which properties have sold and for how much and what rate per square foot that was. But on top of that, what it's also going to show me, this is the little file that comes out. I'll just quickly show you this. So here's all your properties there that have sold. These are the price they sold for. These are the date they sold, the sizes of them. These are the value as at today's date based on rate of growth of indexation. And up here, what you can see is whether that property sold as an HMO or not. As you can see, it's sold as an HMO. The date of the HMO license was the 1st of December 2017, and it then sold on the 12th of March 2021, and that sold 495,000. So very quickly we can build up a picture, and now the HMO register that had a 6-bedroom HMO, in effect. So we then see that sold for I thought I said 450,000 something, and it was 6 beds. So that is £80,000 a room, if I'm correct, 80,000, yes, 495,000 in effect. So about 80 odd grand per room, if my maths is correct. That's what we're wrong, but it's sort of perhaps 90 grand a room, something like that. So very quickly we can drive into understanding all of that. The other thing that might also be useful is just to have a look at where across this part of town there's been any planning applications for HMOs. And the way we do that is we use a little planning search here. We can sort of plot the planning applications on the map. These are kind of perhaps interesting to show us kind of what's going on in an area. Sort of behind the scenes here, we can sort of see by clicking that little button, I've plotted a load of spots on the map to show me where the planning applications are across this particular area. Red is residential and blue is commercial, and both mixed use or change of use. But that's what I really want to do, is I want to see where across Nottingham, if I could spell Nottingham, that'd be helpful. Nottingham, there we go. So this is allowing me to do a search across the planning portal at Nottingham for a number of keywords. So I can, in effect, start to type in things like house and multiple occupation into that search box just there. Or I can use the button here, which just presets that for me. And what I then want to do is I can do some filtering and say, well, show me stuff that's just granted, or show me the refused applications, all this kind of stuff. But what I can then do is then just display that on the map. So in essence, what we'll see here is that list of planning applications in effect for HMOs shown across the map, just like that in effect. So very quickly then I can go and dive into the detail around those specific sites. And down here we'll see a list of kind of the application there. So certificate of lawfulness, which was granted back in 2019 in effect for that property. And I suppose the final thing that I might want to do as part of that is do the same search for HMOs, but I might also just use this little export button here. And the reason I'm using that is that export then layers in more information about the HMOs that have gone through in effect. So this is a list of planning applications for HMOs. Give that a moment to load up. Here we go. So firstly here's the location that we found the planning application. There's the reference number, and this is then the application for the HMO or that's mentioning HMO. So the first thing that's kind of useful for this is to understand what's happening in the marketplace around HMOs. And we can see here change of use of a couple of flats to an 8-bed HMO. So there's 2 flats being merged into one. We've got a change of use for house into 6-bed HMO, certificate of lawfulness, etc., etc. What could be interesting as part of this is perhaps we're seeing the word student dropping into this and things like that. So as we see down here, so it's giving that little kind of pulse of what's happening across Nottingham in that particular area. What are the kind of things that are converting from one thing to another? What is that kind of local knowledge around Nottingham for HMOs? I can then see the status of that planning application. I can filter that on this sort of stuff if I want to. I can see the date the planning application was submitted, the date there was a decision. I can see the address of that property. And then it's a very neat link here that shows me then the title number that property sits on. Where that becomes useful is that what we then do is we then link the owner's details through to that planning application. So these here, the top 2 here are in private ownership. I can go and find the owners of those by buying a title register through Nimbus. But indeed, the 2 below that then are owned by the same company, Oak Property Investments Limited. There's their address. They've actually moved addresses during that time. And there's the date they bought the property, and there's the price they paid for that. On top of that, what's kind of interesting is that on the far right, we can then see who the planning applicant's agent was. So who was the architect or the engineer that particular company used to go and submit their planning application. Now, where this becomes kind of useful is when I start then applying some filters to it too. So I just drop the filters on here. What we can then see is that if I say, well, actually on the left-hand side, we have the most recent planning applications for HMOs across Nottingham. In the middle here, if I say, well, actually now let's also filter this to say only show me the properties that have also sold in the last, say, 3 years, then what I'll find then is a list of people across Nottingham that are busily buying HMOs. These are the prices they paid for those HMOs, so that can be very useful to understand, well, what did they buy, what did they pay for it, and therefore what should I pay for a particular building to do the same thing to it. But equally, what this is showing me then is a list of locally active developers that are buying residential properties or something else across Nottingham and then submitting HMO type applications on those properties. So we then have a list of locally active developers that if we need to raise some external finance, they probably help with that. If you want to back-to-back some of this stuff and flip it, or if you want to act on as an agent for one of these companies to go and buy more of these things, then equally we can do all of that sort of stuff just there. The second thing that I think is kind of useful then is that if I then were to look at who the agents are that they use, then of course those people that are active in that local marketplace will have presumably a decent design team sat behind them, or a decent kind of set of professionals sat behind them. And of course, there's their list of all those people. So what we can then do is we can start to understand, by perhaps even ordering this, perhaps like this, we can start to see where do those names kind of repeat. So heritage developments, maybe they're kind of an interesting company to go and speak to about HMOs across that area. CBP Architects maybe could be interesting too. Rayner Davis Architects would seem like an interesting shout too. Etc. Zenith Planning and Thomason Estate Management and this kind of stuff. So give me a list of who are the locally active architects and planners that perhaps we ought to be considering for an application. Hopefully all of that has made sense. I feel like we probably should jump back into the slides now, Matt, and jump back to the agenda really. So what we've done is we've sort of run through, apologies, let me just bring the right slide back. Apologies, 2 seconds. We've run through how Nimbus helps. As part of that, I used the Elite Plus package. This is where we bring together suites of strategies that you can then use to go and find particular types of opportunity across sort of the UK, depending on where you're searching. If anybody would like to have a go with that themselves, then the way that works, we're very happy to set you up on a trial and give you a demonstration of it. The way you do that is you just scan that QR code in the bottom left-hand corner there. That will book you a call with one of our team. They'll set you up with a one-to-one demonstration of exactly how to use the system, and then they'll set you up with a week-long trial to go and have a go with yourself. And there's a bit.ly link there that I'll pop into the chat in a moment, just if you want to use that. But Matt, how can you help too?
Well, in actual fact, this week is all about sourcing for us at the HMO platform. We've got a free HMO sourcing webinar tomorrow at lunchtime at 12 o'clock. So there's a QR code there you can click to, where you can scan to book onto that. And we're going into quite a bit more information. But also we do in-person events called our Next Level HMO Discovery Days, which are just £97 plus VAT. And if you want to find out more about that, you can use the QR code on the right to book a call with us to find out how that works. We do have one coming up this Saturday, which I know is very last minute for some, but we've got some other dates coming up in the future. So do give us a call to find out more about that.
Fabulous, 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 fabulous. So I'm just checking. So the next thing for us really is to answer some questions. So if anyone would like to ask a question, what I would like you to do is to go into your little control panel on Zoom, and you should find a raise hand button. If I could ask you to raise your hand for me, then we will then invite you up to ask your question. I think Kunwar's raised his hand. Let me just see if we can bring you up to speak, Kunwar.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. How are you doing?
Hello. How are you? It's great to see you, and thank you so much for this. This was extremely informative. Now, I have got 2 quick questions. Firstly, I'm a Nimbus user for a while now, but I've not logged in recently, and recently, as guilty as might be, probably for a few months, really. I would say 3 months. There's an array of new features which has just come into Nimbus, which that you spoke of. So I was wondering if, firstly, a recording of this online session can be available. So what you just demonstrated, Paul, for me to just go through that very slowly. And secondly, I want to definitely speak to someone in the team about the Elite Plus packages for HMO. And if there could be just some one-to-one training for that, that would be extremely helpful. Because you've introduced this location analysis dialog box, which I saw the other day, and I was like, what is this? So hence why I booked this call. So it's just finding my way around. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. We can do a number of things. So obviously, as part of your Elite subscription with us, you get access to our customer success here, so we can get you a sort of another Kickstarter call, if you like, to get you kind of up to speed with all the new stuff that's in there. And obviously, we'll get the team here to give you a buzz to talk about the Elite Plus system for you too. So fabulous.
Excellent. I'll wait for the team to reach out to me. Thank you so much, guys.
Fabulous. So let's see if we've got any other questions. Questions in the Q&A, I believe. Yogesh has raised his hand too. Hi, Yogesh.
Hello. Hi. I don't know if you can see me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I've got a few questions. If that's okay. I'll put them on the chat, but I think you answered the first one about how to get planning with HMO Article 4 area, so thanks for that. The council tax student information you mentioned, so if we don't have access to that, then is it a bit of a risk for us because they might find more HMOs than we know about? I just wondered if you had a comment. We're counting how many HMOs in that area.
So a couple of thoughts on that. The first one would be if you go to the council, they'll tell you to do a pre-application. So if you do a pre-app, then they'll be able to tell you whether you pass that test or not. Obviously, that can be a bit painful and there's an expense. Second thing is to go and look at other previous planning applications. You can use Nimbus to do that and see what they're saying. Read the officer's delegated report to get a sense of what their numbers are when they're calculating that density. So you probably want to find one which is very close to one that you're looking at. And if there isn't one and you want to de-risk it as much as possible, then you probably need to speak to the council. Some councils, I have heard that some councils will tell you over the phone, but most councils will say just do a pre-app and then you'll get an answer on the numbers.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And then just going back to Nimbus Maps, what was it? Oh, mortgage valuations. I know you've got all the sold prices available, but do you have access to the mortgage valuations? You know, when people do remortgages, and is that something? Well, I can't hear you, but
so what I showed was the location analysis tool. So the location analysis tool looks at sold properties, links those through to the sizes of them, and then also checks whether they're on the HMO register or not. So, and then kind of brings through information from the HMO register to show you number of bedrooms and this sort of stuff from it. So it's sold transactions rather than mortgage valuations or revaluations and remortgage and that sort of stuff.
Is that something you might be able to do later? Is that public? You know, mortgage valuations, or not really?
Public? No, we've not found a location for that, I'm afraid. So
no, I think that's why valuers can charge what they charge for commercial valuations, because they've got their black book of all the information that they have. Piecing together valuations of properties is always going to be based on sold comparables. So the valuer is going to go and find sold properties. So that's the job, is to go and find the sold property of the sold HMO, essentially, because that's the only way you can really hang your hat on it, or just pay a valuer to go around and then you'll get your answer.
Yeah, because they've got access to a database, but we don't. So that
they do, unfortunately. Yeah. You could become a surveyor.
That's a good idea. Rick's qualified.
I mean, ultimately, those revaluations, though, as Matt says, are looking at what has sold, and therefore what does that mean this building's worth if it was sold. And so in reality, what they're doing is the revaluation is just looking at what stuff sold at that point, and therefore what does that mean about the value of this particular building. The core underlying information that they're using is the sold information, which is what Nimbus is showing for you. So so you should be able to get there with what Nimbus has. And of course, the valuation itself is a subjective opinion of the surveyor, rather than an actual transaction that is a matter of fact, if you like.
You know, it's really powerful. Yeah. And the last question, you talked about this when you talk about converting properties to HMOs, Paul, you mentioned something about Class G and using Class MA, and you lost me a little bit. Do you know what I was talking about? Do you mind going over?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I think I'm being attacked by one of our banners at the back here. So what we were talking about there, so Class G was the old shops uppers. So it's kind of take a shop, convert the upper parts into 2 flats under Class G PD rights. That got extended to say you can now do, it hasn't got to be a shop on the ground floor, it can be an office, it can be anything under the new Class E. Then at the same, well, not quite the same time actually, it was last year in September, they brought out this thing called Class MA. Now, Class MA applies to Class E buildings, sort of the less than 1,500 square meters in effect. And there's sort of 1 or 2 other sort of restrictions around which buildings you can apply it to based on the planning constraints. So, and we can kind of talk about that in sort of more detail. But one of the key things that makes Class MA sometimes difficult is the fact you have to prove it's been empty for 3 months before you can get your Class MA PD rights to convert the whole building into residential. So it's the well, how do I get the building empty in order to get my Class MA PD rights Well, the way you can do that is Class G doesn't have a vacancy test. So Class G will apply to the same buildings that Class MA applies to, because Class G has a broader reach than Class MA does. Class MA is limited on size, limited on various other little bits and pieces, whereas Class G isn't. And Class G then doesn't have that vacancy test, which means you could get a Class G planning consent on a building, which only applies to the upper parts rather than the ground floor. But it means that then if I've got in my head a 3-story doctor's surgery, something like that, and actually I want to get that back to redevelop it for housing or flats or whatever, or for HMOs, then I can get a planning consent under Class G with the doctor's surgery still there for 2 flats above it. The ground floor still says doctor's surgery, but that then probably means it's probably not fit for purpose for the doctor's surgery anymore because it's not big enough. They can decamp into an office building around the corner because that's the same use now. There's no change of use for that anymore. And that would allow me to get, I've already got a planning consent then to convert the upper parts of the building. Once that tenant's moved out for 3 months, I can then use Class MA to get PD rights on the ground floor as well. Does that make sense?
I think you're saying that because you've got it, because it qualified for the Class G, you'll probably qualify for the MA, because that's a...
Other around.
Oh, okay.
If it qualifies for Class MA,
yeah,
it'll qualify for Class G.
I think the key thing here is about how you get the building back. How do you break the lease? How do you and essentially you've got to prove that you're going to redevelop the property to be able to get that property back. So the planning consent allows you to do that.
Okay, very, very helpful. Thank you, guys. Matt, I'm seeing you on Saturday.
Yes, you are indeed. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Yogesh. I have another question here. Is there growing demand for allocation of joint areas for co-working space, especially in HMOs, slightly further away from city? Is that financially viable? That's a question from Matty.
Question for Matty from Matty.
Yes, quite.
Is there growing demand for allocation of the joint areas for co-working space? So I think I know what you're asking, but if not, then please do ask again and clarify. But essentially, you're asking that we can get away with doing HMOs further away because if you include more co-working, then it's going to be it's going to be desirable because people don't need to travel for work, etc. It's something which I think could be financially viable. When people have asked me about this before, my general response is it's highly unlikely that every single person living in that HMO is going to be working purely from home. So you will still need to think about the key elements as to why you would buy an HMO. So the amenity around it, the transport links, etc. So these are all things that we talk about regularly. The reason for buying something has to stack up. If in doubt, you just need to test the market and just see whether you get responses for placing adverts in an area which is maybe slightly different to where you might normally put the HMO. I like the idea of that, especially if it's maybe slightly out. It's still near maybe a satellite train station, but more green space, maybe get a larger property, and you could maybe develop it more. So, but just be aware that might have detrimental impact on valuation as well if there's not that many comparables nearby. But it could work really well for demand. We just need to test that and sense check it every step of the way.
Fabulous. Question from Tom just about he'd had a free trial on Nimbus and had a problem over a period. We do kind of updates over the weekends. And I think his 7-day trial ran over a weekend. Tom, if you need more time on Nimbus, then if you get in touch with our customer success team, they'll be delighted to let you have a bit longer on the system to give you a chance to use the kind of key features you're after. So feel free to reach out on that. And if you use that link that I put in the chat a moment ago, then that will get you a call with the team who will then be able to get you set up with that. So please do feel free to use that. Question from Joseph there.
Approach to filling HMOs. Current strategy is through discussion with local business, universities, management companies, and any other tactic you use for student-specific HMOs too. So just to clarify, we don't have any student HMOs in our particular portfolio. But we are aware of the market. Obviously, we work with people that do. I think you're doing the right thing for essentially where are the people, local businesses definitely, but think where do people look, where are people going to be searching for the room, where they're going to find it. So most often people just Google rent a room in Nottingham. So what comes up on that front page of Google, and you just want to have your room listed in a very nice, amazing way so that it's very clickable when it comes up. So if it's a spare room that comes up in the top 2 or 3, then you want to be on spare room. If it's Rightmove, you've got to come up on, you want to be on Rightmove. If it's Coho, you want to be on Coho. There's all these different platforms that you could be on, but what's the best one for your area, and you just do a quick search.
Fabulous. So let's just remove those. I think we've covered most of the questions. A question from James around the information that we provide at Nimbus from sales comparables. There isn't a yields comparable on HMOs that we provide. So you'd use something like spareroom.com to work that out. We do provide a link directly through to the sales particulars of the property. So you'd be able to kind of see, well, what did it sell for? What would you think the rent of that should be based on whether it's a beige box or whether it's a next level HMO, kind of how you kind of understand that in effect. So we get you a pretty long way down the line with that. But you would just need to kind of understand what you think the estimated rental value of that property was. And obviously you've got the sort of the fact around what it sold for. Yeah,
there's a process that we go through with our clients for getting the best, getting as close as possible. Yeah, but it can be quite intensive once you've got the starting point from Nimbus.
Fabulous. I think that's covered all the questions. You're going to check there's no further questions raised. So I think we've got all of that covered, I think. So let's just drop back to there. So I suppose the final thing for me to do really is firstly to thank you, Matt, for your time today. It's been delightful having us kind of face to face. And of course, thank you all for your time today and for watching today. We've had lots of fun. Hope you have too. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.